This is my point to see how many times I can say the word voluntarily in a 30-second hit. But I write a letter voluntarily to the players and making sure that they voluntarily read it and voluntarily show up. No.
Mike Florio having some fun last week, and it's amazing how many people react to that saying, oh, you might have violated the CBA. But look, the whole thing's a joke. The whole thing's a joke. For years, coaches have been dancing on the line or jumping across it as it relates to the rule against saying or doing anything that would suggest that voluntary workouts aren't really voluntary. Everybody does it. Everybody knows the game here. Devin, I'm curious to know what your thoughts were and what your attitude was when you were playing. I mean, I remember when my son was playing high school football and they had voluntary workouts. And you know what? If you wanted to be part of the team, you voluntarily showed up. Where else are you going to be? What else are you doing? It's a basic litmus test of how committed someone is. And really, there aren't many guys that can confidently boycott voluntary workouts and not worry about whether or not their spot on the depth chart or the spot on the roster might be in trouble because the guy you're competing with is there doing what the coach wants, even if the coach can't say it out loud, and you're not.
I'm going to try to make sure I don't go too far with this one. But this was one of the things that irked me the most towards the end of my NFL career because, remember, there were a lot of teams, and not a lot of teams, but there were some teams that their offseason program was damn near mandatory. When I went to New England, it was mandatory, and everybody thinks it was mandatory because of Bill. It was mandatory because Tom Brady went. When Tom Brady decided that he would go and be a part of the offseason workout program, who the hell else as a player says, I'm not going? Like, how do you go in and say, I'm not going when the best player's there? Maybe he's gone for like 1 week out of it or a few days. But for the most part, day in and day out, when I got to New England, Tom Brady was there. And these teams were built that way. So then what happened was the culture started being like that we go to off-season programs and then you win. So then what does the coach do? He emphasizes that we're all a part of the offseason program in April and how much of a head start we get when we get to training camp. And then that becomes your norm. And then then COVID happens. And once COVID happens, no one's allowed at the offseason program. The gyms weren't even open. You had to just go and work out on your own. And we have a season. And guys stay healthy and different. And I remember that was the first time in my career I was like, I think I'm over the offseason program. Like, I'll go back for some stuff, but I'm going to pick and choose. And I remember getting in phone calls all throughout the NFL because now this was a point where as a PA, it was like, we're done. One way to gain leverage is we got to get guys to not go. And I remember being on the phone and I'm just like, this is ridiculous. If I wasn't in the position I am in New England, I would be at the offseason program. The younger me would be at the offseason program. So to now try to tell guys not to go is ridiculous. You just, like when I was in high school, they called it captain's practice. You had to go to captain's practice. The coaches weren't allowed to be there. They weren't allowed to work with you. They saw everybody walk to the field. They were in their offices. They were in their cars. They saw who went there. They had the attendance sheet there. When you were in college, summer program wasn't mandatory. If you were on scholarship, you had to take a summer class. You didn't have to go to the workout. Yeah, you wouldn't play if you didn't go, but you didn't have to go. So the offseason program for a lot of teams, especially if the best players go, that's going to make it mandatory for those guys, those quarterbacks and different players who live in the city, who like getting work, especially quarterbacks who like throwing with the receivers and like doing that. It makes sense for everybody else to throw at the facility because you're covered if you get hurt. If you're not a big money guy in your contract, you can't afford to lose, and they will cut you if you get hurt in the offseason for non-football activity. You can't afford to go and work out somewhere else because we found that out after COVID too, when guys were like, I'm not going. And then I think it was Jawan James, I don't remember exactly, the offensive lineman, gets hurt while training in the offseason, not at the facility. He gets cut, and I remember being on Twitter and seeing players like, that's messed up. You could get cut. And I'm like, yeah, you can get cut. I know you can get cut. We should know you can get cut if you're not there. So I just think the offseason program, even though Vrabel was joking, I do think it will always be a fabric of the NFL until rules change around it. Because if I'm a player, Unless I've made enough where I think I'm valuable enough that the team won't cut me, I'm going to do my training at the facility because it makes the most sense because you're covered. So again, not to go too far on this, I think it's a huge topic, but it's not a bargaining chip. It's not a leverage point for the PA at all.
No, it's not. They tried to make it one. You touched on that. It was right around COVID, and there was an effort to get guys to stay away. Well, what about the guys that have $300,000 workout bonuses? And they didn't push those guys. The Packers are big on the workout bonuses, so they create a strong incentive for players to volunteer to show up. Other teams use salary de-escalators like the Cowboys. They create financial incentive to show up or disincentive to not show up. But you're not going to get everybody to sign on. Like you said, it's free insurance for your salary in the event you drop a dumbbell on your foot and you're out for the year. You drop the dumbbell on your foot at the Planet Fitness down the street, you're screwed. You drop the dumbbell on your foot at the team facility, you're covered. Your salary's paid. You go on injured reserve if you're out for the year, and they owe you every penny. So that's a very practical reason to go. And there's that competitive idea. You got 90 guys on the offseason roster. 37 of them aren't going to be there in September. And, okay, I'm going to do everything I can to make sure I'm not one of the 37. I'm going to show up. I'm young. I'm undrafted. That was the problem. When the rookies come in, they're going to show up. And I remember arguing a few years ago, the best way to make this work, the best way to try to turn this into a bargaining chip is to get all the quarterbacks to come together and say, we're not going. Good luck having football practice if you have no quarterbacks there. But even then, you can't hold it together because there's going to be some young guy, some Tom Brady who was picked 199th overall, who sees it as his opportunity to go there and prove himself. And it's easier to prove myself if there's no other quarterbacks there. So that's the problem. You got a lot of guys with naturally different agendas. You cannot bring, and credit to the NFL, well done. You've realized you can call it voluntary, and it's really not voluntary, and there's never going to be a real push to make it mandatory because we're not going to make some concession so they'll be mandatory. We don't need to. They're already de facto mandatory.
Yeah, and you said it, though. The quarterback's doing anything is the key to everything for the PA. Like, unless you have the quarterbacks fully in, like, there's nothing you can talk about, no matter what. Every conversation I was ever a part of, it was, hey, we have this executive committee. It's full of long snappers and linemen and punters and random DB here and there. I was like, if I was the owners and I sat down at that table, I'm like, I don't even know these guys. Like I've never heard of them. But if you sat 12 quarterbacks across from the best in the league, like, it would change. But always that's always going to be an issue. You don't have the quarterbacks. Now, there was a unique, and I always think there's unique things you can do. Like you just said, if you don't have a quarterback, good luck with practice. Well, what if on a Tuesday we decide, hey, every offensive lineman, it's voluntary. Just don't go for this one Tuesday where you know we have an OTA practice. Good luck. You have no offensive line. But can you still do stuff? Yeah, and I always think that's the issue. You're always going to have guys that are going to say, I'm selfishly going to take care of my own career, and I'm going to do what I need to do to be successful. But I do think, like you said, I look at these new teams that are going to be, you look at the, Chicago, the Patriots, you look at the Jets, you look at these teams that have coaches that are coming into environments like the Patriots. It's been two different head coaches now. Now Vrabel comes in, he's a savior. You look at Aaron Glenn and the Jets and the Chicago Bears. It's been bad for so long, so these coaches need to come in and get the feeling, like everybody feeling good about what's going on. And you need extra time to do that because you can't waste time when everybody else gets started on moving forward for the next season. You can't really be in there thinking about your culture and how to make people believe on, like, getting 2 weeks ahead to do that, I think gives you a chance to somewhat be on level playing field when everybody else starts. Because in this league, the teams like the Chiefs and the Eagles, the teams that were good the year before, when you start in April, you don't really start from scratch anymore. When I first got in the NFL, that was more. I remember getting in there like my second year, and the thought is like, we're going to start from the scratch and we're going to build this thing up every year, have this beginner's mentality, because Michael Jordan always had a beginner's mentality. And that conversation shifted a little bit because you had less time on field. You didn't get to be together as much. So then when I was in New England, it was just like, hey, we got a lot of guys coming back. We got a lot of like, let's pick up a little bit where we left off and let's get ahead now. And I think that's the advantage for these teams of, if you get those 2 weeks, get in there, start to build your culture. We saw Washington do it last year with Dan Quinn, of getting in there, talking a lot about culture. And then next thing you know, you're like, damn, Commanders in the NFC Championship. So we never know where it can lead when these teams start off early and get a good feeling about them as they go forward into the new season.
One more quick point I want to make before we break, and we have to break. But we mentioned earlier the tension between the union and the agents as it relates to the ability of players to collude against the teams. I've detected over the years, Devin, some tension between the union and the franchise quarterbacks because they're kind of company men. And it's hard to get the best quarterbacks to be involved in the union because they're more identified with management. The best quarterbacks are basically an extension of management. And I'm not going to name names, but I know that there's been some frustration when, a quarterback that maybe hasn't been involved in the union all of a sudden needs the union. Like, say, for example, when he's being squeezed to change his guarantee structure or he's going to get benched, and all of a sudden he runs to the union, and the union's kind of like, now you need us. We needed you, and you're company man. Now you need us. Okay, and they still, they do what they have to do, but there is that frustration there because the quarterbacks are caught between labor and management, and a lot of times they're a lot closer to management than people realize. Hi, it's Mike Florio. Thanks for watching PFT on YouTube. Hit subscribe for the latest news and analysis from Pro Football Talk.